Judges, I just want to jump into it and say that just like when you look at the human viewpoint of the book of Judges, it's all dark. It's very, very dark. What Israel is doing is dark in their walk away from obedience to God and their walk away from worshiping Yahweh as the only God that's ever existed and ever will. It's a dark book. But when you look at it from the standpoint or from the viewpoint of Jesus, of God, it's a very bright book. It's very bright. It's very hopeful. It's very merciful and gracious when you look at the fact that Yahweh is faithful. We've talked about these things, that He never abandons His purpose for mankind. He never abandons His purpose for calling out the Jews, these people that are being disobedient with Him. Why is God so merciful? Why is God so gracious? Why is God so forgiving? Well, you put your name in there. It's because of you. It's because He made a promise to Abraham that through Abraham, the Jew, all the families of the earth would be blessed through the eventual ultimate Jew, Jesus Christ. It's because of a promise He made to mankind. He didn't only make it to Israel. When He said all the families of the world will be blessed through you, to Abraham, He made a promise to us that He would send a deliverer. So when you go through the book of Judges, when you go through any book of the Bible, make it personal. This is about God being faithful to a promise He made to you to save Adam, your father and mine, through the people Israel. And so when God is forgiving to Israel, don't say, oh, God, crush them. And I know some of us may have the tendency to say, okay, enough, crush them already, crush them. Don't lose sight of the fact that were He to have crushed them, you and me go to hell forever. Don't lose sight of what's going on here. We go through these things and maybe we see them as Old Testament, ancient history, and sometimes if you're not a history buff like I am, maybe it gets a little dry to you. Don't lose sight of the faithfulness of God to walk with Israel through these things, because His ultimate goal was to bring Jesus Christ to earth to pay for the sins of Adam's race. And if God doesn't do what He's doing through Gideon, if God doesn't build Gideon's faith up, if Gideon doesn't cast off the oppression of the Midianites, we've got a problem in the plan of God. But to show that there is no problem in the plan of God and that God cannot be defeated by Satan or by the unbelief of men, we have the book of Judges. Look what it says in Judges chapter 7, verse 4. The Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Remember, Gideon has amassed an army of 32,000 men. The Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east, the Arabians, they have an army of 135,000 men. Listen to the numbers again. 32,000 Jews versus 135,000 Gentiles. And God says to Gideon, you've got too many men in your army. Building his faith. Building his trust in God. Do you trust me? Do you trust me to defeat 135,000 men with 32,000 men? If you trust me to do that, what's the difference in trusting me to defeat 135,000 men with 300 men? What's the difference? It's an impossible task. What's the difference? There is no difference. Remember when God, the angel of the Lord, came to Gideon, he said, you're going to defeat the Midians as if they're one man. It's going to be that easy a battle for you, for Israel, because God has declared that the Midianite oppression is over. And He's going to fight the battle. So the Lord said to Gideon, the people are too many. Too many people in your army, 32,000, way too many. And He tells them why. Because I don't want you to say that you, Israel, won this battle. This is Yahweh's battle. So He says, bring them down to the water. And I'll test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, then he shall go with you. He will remain in your army. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. He shall be released from his army duty. And so Gideon said, okay. He did it. He brought the people down to the water. Yahweh said to Gideon, can you imagine having this one-on-one personal conversation with the living God, Creator God? Gideon was having it. Yahweh said to Gideon, "You shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink." We talked about what this might mean next time. I'm just trying to land us in the story. Verse 6, so this is the way that God decided he was going to bring the army down. It's already gone down from 32,000 to 10,000. Remember, God said, if anyone is fearful, let them go home. And 2/3 of the army left. 2/3 of the army was afraid to fight and left. So Gideon has 10,000 men. God says, bring them down to the water. I want to see how they drink water. They're all thirsty. They're all going to want water. Based on how they physically drink the water, that's how I'm going to determine who goes with you. And so that's what he did. Now the number of those who lapped, verse 6, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink the water. So 9,700 men knelt all the way down on all fours, put their face in the water and drank water. These are thirsty men. 300 of them actually reached down and got some water in their hands, brought it up to themselves, and lapped water. God says, those are the ones I want. Why did he choose to do this? Ask God one day. Who knows? 300 men. All the rest of the people kneeled to drink. And what does God say to Gideon? That's the number. 300 versus 135,000. Now that's a fight I want in. Those are the odds that Yahweh likes. 300 versus 135,000. And to God, that's a sufficient fight. Wow. The Lord said to Gideon, I'll deliver you with the 300 men who lapped, and will give Midianites, I will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all the other people go, each man to his home. So now we're down, Gideon's down from 32,000 men. His 32,000 man army has become 300 men, and you've got what would that be? Whatever the math is, 22,000 men that are going home, the fearful ones. And now you've got another 9,700 Jewish men that are walking home. Remember these men that are on their way back to their territory in just a minute when Gideon says, come back. So verse 8 says, so the 300 men took the people's provisions and their trumpets. Remember the trumpets, the shofar. Here's an example of one, a ram's horn. If you can imagine, this would be on a ram's head. Don't anybody say anything? But this is what they took. They took the shofars and they took the war provisions. They didn't take the food, as we'll see in just a minute. They remained hungry. I don't know that they had many provisions. But they took the people's provisions and their trumpets into their hands, and Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent. So off they go back to their own tribal allotments, their own territories, etc. But he retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Now, I've showed you these pictures last time. The Jezreel Valley, also called in Greek, Esdraelon, the plain of Esdraelon. You may have heard a pastor use that phrase before. Famous because in Revelation 19, when Jesus comes back and he fights the battle of Har-Mageddon, Mount Megiddo, this is actually a picture. I think this picture was taken from Mount Megiddo. This is where we get the name Har. The word Har, H-A-R, is the Hebrew word for mountain. So when you hear this word Armageddon, we're talking about a battle fought at the foot of Mount Megiddo. And here you're looking over the Jezreel Valley. These are shadows back here, not mountains. The mountains are on the other side. This is Mount Tabor, where Jesus is said to have transfigured himself in Matthew 17. But you can see the vastness of this valley. It goes on. 141 square mile triangle valley that the armies of the world have fought in at least 134 times over human history. 134 historical accounts of major wars, major battles taking place in that valley. That's where this is going to take place, in the valley of Jezreel, the plains of Esdraelon. Another view of the same plain from the same place. You can see Mount Tabor back there. You can always tell Mount Tabor because it's just that perfect little hump. even conical. It doesn't have any ridges on it. It's just a perfect little hump. Another picture of the same valley looking a little bit south. It would be southeast here, looking down the valley. And you can see the mountains, Gilboa, and the other one on the right there, showing this plain. Gilboa, I would think, this area right here is where all of this is taking place with Gideon, looking down into the valley where the army is, the bad army. So, the Jezreel Valley. We see here that what God is doing is building Gideon's faith. Got to stop to talk about faith just for a minute. We use this word all the time. We trip over it. We talk about it. We go over it very quickly like everyone knows exactly what faith means. I just want to talk about faith for just a minute because I've said this. God is building up Gideon's faith. Gideon lacks faith. He lacks confidence in God. He lacks the ability to trust everything that God says and to follow through with it. So God says, I'm going to give Midianites into your hands. Gideon wants a sign. The fleece, the wet fleece, and then the dry fleece. Gideon says, I'm going to give, or God says to Gideon again, I'm going to give them into your hand with these 300 men. Gideon is still fearful. He still lacks trust. He just doesn't believe God will do what He says He's going to do. He wants proof. He lacks trust, faith. So God continues building Gideon's faith here, as we'll see in the next verses, by letting Gideon overhear the enemy. He's going to send Gideon down into the valley, down into this area here, off of the mountain where Israel is, and down into the valley. And Gideon's going to get so close that he can actually overhear a conversation that two Midianites are having about their future. This is how God builds up Gideon's faith, another way. But we talk about faith a lot. Just a minute. Let's move into the New Testament in our minds to look at this. You know what? Turn in your Bibles real fast to Hebrews 11. What is faith? I mean, at its root definition, what does it mean to have faith, to be faithful, to have faith, to exercise faith, to put your faith in God, the promises of God, or anything else? What does that word mean? In Hebrews chapter 11, we have a definition for faith. At least a definition for faith. It's characteristics of what faith is. And in Hebrews 11:1 it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Not things that you have, things that are yet future. Things that are hoped for. We'll talk about this in just a second. And it also says faith is the conviction of things not seen. If you look back, I wanted you to turn to Hebrews because I want you to look at Hebrews chapter 10 just for a second. What's going on here in context? I mean, you can't go to the book of Hebrews and say this is what faith means only looking forward. You got to look backwards and see what is the writer of Hebrews talking about when he makes this great declaration about what faith is. Look what it says in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 32. Let's just read a few verses here. Faith in what? What do we have to look forward to? What is this future hope that we are assured of will come to pass? What is the context? But recall the former days in which after you were illuminated, after you became a Christian, you endured a great struggle with sufferings. Struggles in the Christian life. Partly while you were made a spectacle both by reproaches and tribulations or trials, stresses in life, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. Maybe you weren't the one imprisoned, but you had another Christian friend imprisoned and it weighed on you. For you had compassion on me in my chains. So the writer of Hebrews at some point was imprisoned for his Christianity. You had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully, listen to this, how often is this your call in life? Is this a truth about you? Could the writer of Hebrews say, and you, Rick, joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods? Because that's what the Jews did, these believing Jews in Hebrews. You joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing, okay, now here we get into those things hoped for. Why would you allow yourself in life reproaches, tribulations, struggles? Why do you joyfully accept these things in your life? It's because of a future that you know is sure. He says, knowing, because I've taught you and you know that you have a better and enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. Why would you allow somebody to come and take the things that you own right now? Because the treasures I have stored on earth are nothing compared to the treasures that God has stored away for me in heaven. Do you believe that? I'm asking you, do you believe that? That in the future there is laid up for you a kind of glorified future that makes whatever trial you're going through right now pale, almost disappear. It's so insignificant because of the glory which lays ahead. Do you believe that? That's faith. Knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven, therefore, because you know of your future, because of the promises God has made. Not because you've seen it, but because of the promises God has made. Where did God make the promises? Right here. Right here in the Word. So where do we get these promises, these things hoped for? What are we talking about? Biblical promises. Promises God made in the Word. Therefore, he says, do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. Hold fast to what you know about your future. Live today in light of a glorious eternity that's coming for you. For you have need of endurance. I wonder if any of us feel a little bit beaten down by whatever God has brought into our lives today or yesterday or the past year. Just feel labored like you're dragging an appendage behind you everywhere you go, this weight. I know some of you feel like that. Some of the Hebrew Jews felt like that, the Christian Jews, the Hebrews that this writer was writing to. He says, don't cast away your confidence. You have need of endurance so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. It's all about future promises that God has made. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and not tarry. The just shall live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. And then we have this phrase in Hebrews chapter 11. What does it take to have endurance, to hold on with confidence to the reward that's coming based on the promise? What does it take? And the writer of Hebrews says it takes faith. It takes faith. And he says faith is the assurance or the confidence. You could write the word confidence in. Faith is the confidence of the things hoped for that God promised you. You have to be confident about what God has promised you, or you won't be courageous in this life. You won't live courageously. You'll live fearfully. Like who? Like Gideon. And God is having to build up Gideon's confidence in the words he said to Gideon, I have given over the Midianites. I've given them into your hand. You'll defeat them as if they're one man. Trust me. You don't need 32,000 men. As a matter of fact, you don't even need 10,000 men, Gideon. I'm taking you in there with 300 men, and watch me do it. Because I'm the God of heaven. And I've decreed it's time for the Midianites to leave the land of Canaan. Gideon just doesn't have the confidence of the things that God has promised him. He doesn't have the confidence of the things that are hoped for yet. What is the next phrase? The conviction, again you could add the word confidence there, of the things not seen. Now let me tell you about what's going on in Hebrews chapter 11. Look what it says in verse 4. What I'm trying to tell you here is that many of the things, most of the things in this list in Hebrews, now listen to this statement, most of the things that these people that are listed in this hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, have never been seen on planet Earth. You talk about faith. What God has called these people to do that made this list, most of these things are impossible or have never occurred on planet Earth. Just look what he told Noah. Not verse 4. Where's Noah at? Verse 7. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen. What do you call that? The fact that God divinely warned Noah something that had not yet been seen on earth. You call it revelation from God. God is revealing His plan to man. Today He reveals His plan to us in this book. But that's exactly what He did to Noah. He just did it in a different way. He spoke to Noah. Today He speaks to us through this book. So God gave Noah a revelation. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to cause it to rain. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. I tell you, according to Hebrews chapter 1, this is having confidence in things you have never seen. Like Noah, who had never seen rain fall from the sky. God says, the deep, I'm going to open up the deep and the waters of the earth are going to come out, and water is going to fall from the sky and flood every high mountain. Everything on earth will be flooded. Noah had never seen it, had never even experienced rainfall. Because before the days of Noah, God would water the earth from the dew of the ground every morning. That's what the Bible says. Noah had never even seen it rain. You want to talk about faith? What does he do for the next 120 years? He builds a boat. Why would he build a boat? Because he was absolutely convinced that God would do something that Noah had never seen before. And he spent a fifth of his life. Noah lives 500 years when he has his sons. He lives a fifth of his life building a boat to save him from a flood that he had no idea was coming or not. He simply believed God and acted on it. He believed what God revealed to him, and he did something with it. That's faith. That's simple faith. Living according to what God says He will do for you, that is faith. Living according to what God says He will do for you. Knowing the life of Noah through the Bible builds our faith. Why do you think God would put a story about Noah in the Bible? Why does God put stories about Gideon and men like Gideon in the Bible? To let us know there are times when you lack faith, but I'm telling you, I'm a builder of faith. Watch what I did in Gideon's life and let me build your faith in me. Through the teaching of the Word, through the accounts, all these people in the Bible, through what I do in your life personally, let me build your faith the way I built Gideon's faith. I've done it before. I'll do it again. I want you to be convicted of soul that everything I've promised you will come true. Do any of us, I mean, we're thousands of years after Noah, certainly after Gideon, do any of us have faith? Do we live by faith in any promise that God has given us? God promised Gideon that I'm going to defeat the Midianites through you and your army of 300. I know there's 135,000 out there. I see them. But I'm going to defeat them. So faith, just a very quick definition, trust in the revelation of God. Faith has to have an object. You can't have faith in nothing. If you say, I have faith, you know, how many times have you been in a pickle and somebody puts their arm around you? Oh, just have faith, brother. Faith in what? Tell me something I can hold on to. Give me a promise that God has made me in the Bible. If you want me to have faith, if you really want to encourage me, don't just come up and say, have faith, brother, it'll all work out. Based on what? Why? Tell me the story of Gideon. Tell me how God works in Noah's life and Abel's life and all these lives of the Bible. Give me some God truth to hold on to. Don't just tell me to have faith. Faith has to have an object. Faith is like reaching out for the chain of an anchor to hold you in a storm. If there's no chain and no anchor, there's nothing going to hold you there. This faith, and how many people say that? Oh, have faith. Have faith, it'll all work out. No, tell me what to have faith in. Give me some Bible. The revelation of God, the Word of God, the revealed truth of God. That's what faith is. It's having trust in what God has told us He will do. That's faith. That's biblical faith. How do we exercise faith? We trust. Or we have faith, or we believe, or we have absolute confidence. This word hope in Hebrews chapter 11, faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Hoped for is this word elpis. It means to have confident expectation, to be absolutely certain that this is going to happen. Hope doesn't mean what we think it means. Well, I hope it all works out. I guess I'll have faith and I'll hope it all works out. That is not at all the biblical use of these words. Hope is confidently expecting that God will do what He said He would do. So how do we exercise faith? We have faith, we have trust, we believe, we have absolute confidence in what God has revealed to us. Where do we find that? Where do we find the revelation of God? It's in the Bible. It's Bible truth. That's why the sign out front, if you've noticed, says, what's it say? Gulf Coast Bible Church. Because everybody in this church believes, is absolutely convicted, has faith, has trust, that the answers to this life are all found in this book, the Bible. They're not found in the flowery speech of the pastor. They're not found in any other place in this church. We all are convicted, absolutely convinced and confident that life is lived through what God teaches us in the Bible. And that's it. That's why this church is named what it's named. In the Bible, in the Bible, in the Bible. We trust in what He has revealed to us in the Bible, and we do what He tells us to do. Faith is active. It's not just sitting down, oh, I have faith, God will work this out. Sometimes you got to get up and do. I asked the question, I want to follow through with this. Do you have faith in an unseen promise of God? Question again. Are you living your life based on something that you have never seen but absolutely are convinced to be the truth? Have you ever seen, I'll use Betty, and I shouldn't because she'll make me cry, but I'll use Betty as an analogy, as a point. Betty Bergstrom. We buried her last year. Where is she right now? Somebody tell me where her body is. Where's her body? It's in the ground. But we also have a belief, according to the Bible, that Betty was not only the body that we saw, but Betty was a soul that communicated with other humans and a spirit that communicated with God, who is a spirit. Where are those? Where? Why do you believe that? Because the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be face to face with the Lord. Now, let me ask you this. Have you seen, Sarah, this is a question for you. Dear Mama, have you laid eyes on her as she sits face to face with Jesus Christ right now? But is she there? See, that's living according to a promise that we've never touched. We've never seen it. We've never heard it. Our senses have not been privy. God has not let us see it, hear it, smell it, touch it. But yet we believe it and we live everything that we do according to that promise. Our very lives are built on faith. Because we are absolutely convinced. We don't have an idea that may or may not be true. The way some people say, oh, the Bible's a crutch for you weak people. Friend, the Bible is the conviction of life. This isn't a crutch. This is the anchor and the foundation of our souls. We believe everything this book says because we can go back in history in this book and see that everything that God has ever promised man, as outlandish as the promises were, like the promise to Abraham to save anyone you can get on the ark, but I'll destroy everything else. I'm going to bring rain that you've never seen, and I want you to just spend a little bit of time, Noah, I don't know what name I said. I just want you to give me a little bit of your life, Noah, 120 years, and build me a boat. It's just as outlandish to tell me or to tell you, I'm going to take Betty, and although I'm going to commit her body to the ground, because from dust you are, to dust you are, and to dust you shall return. But I'm going to pull from Betty. I'm going to separate her. That's what death is. I'm going to separate Betty into parts. I'm going to take her soul and her spirit, and I'm going to bring it with me to heaven. I'll have angels go get it from earth. And I'll bring her to heaven with me. And one day when I am ready, God says, I will send my son, this one right here, the one with nail-scarred hands, Jesus the Messiah. I will send my son back to earth. And one day Betty's soul and her spirit will come back with Jesus to earth. Her body will raise from the grave, and her soul and her spirit will be reunited with her body. I'll meet her in the clouds, and she will be glorified forever. Now, I'm asking you, Christian, do you believe that? Why? Not because I just said it. Who cares who said it? It's because God says it in this book. That's why you believe it. That's faith. That is faith. Having confidence in something you have never seen. That's faith. What's the Bible say? We don't live by sight. We live by faith. And it exactly peels off of Hebrews chapter 11. This is confidence in things we've never seen. Like Sarah, who Hebrews 11, 90 years old, cannot have a baby. She's too old. She has no, let's speak anatomically, she has no egg. She's beyond the years of human childbearing. She has no egg to be fertilized. It's impossible for Sarah to get pregnant. Absolutely impossible, crazy talk. But it happened, didn't it? What was Sarah's response when the angel said, this time next year I'll come back, Sarah will be with child? She laughed. So she named her son what? Yitzhak. Yitzhak. Laughter. As if to remind her all her life, God says, this is what you're going to name this boy, as if to remind you all your life that you once doubted that I could do what I said I was going to do. Sarah, don't ever doubt me again. What do you call that? Building faith. Don't you know every time Mama called out for her boy, Yitzhak? Oh, Father, I'll never doubt you again. I'll never doubt you again. He's building her faith, building Gideon's faith, building our faith through the things that we go through. If you let him build your faith, he'll build your faith. We live by faith all the time. Matthew 6:19, don't store up treasures for yourself on earth. How many of you have a soul that would like a few treasures on earth? Like a bigger this, a better this, a shinier that. Oh, come on. He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Why, Lord? Everybody else is storing up treasures. Where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves instead. He says, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Have you ever seen a treasure in heaven? Have you ever seen gold, silver, or precious stone waiting for you to be given to you at the judgment seat of Christ? Because that's what it says in the book, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, that you will be presented with gold, silver, and precious stones to reward you for your good work, and crown upon crown to reward you for your good work done in the name of Jesus Christ on this earth. But let me ask you, have you seen that pile yet? No. But Jesus says, trust me. What else did Jesus say? I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and receive you to myself, that where you are, that where I am, there you may be also. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is coming back to take you at the rapture? Do you believe that? Why? It's because that's what God promised in the book. Well, why can you believe this, God? Because I know the story of Gideon. Because I know the Old Testament. Because I know all these stories, all these accounts, all these historical events that were impossible. I know Noah. I know Sarah. This God can't be stopped. He can beat an army of 135,000 with 300 men like it's just nothing, like child's play. I know this God, and I'm all in with this God. If He says do, I'm doing, because I know what He can do. So Jesus says, store for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in to steal. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. That's where your motivation is. So are we heavenly minded, or are we just mine, this collection of things on earth and time and whatever it is that we covet, that we hold on tight? I had a pastor friend that used to tell me, whatever you love, brother, whatever you really, really, really love, you better hold it in an open palm. Because God can take it. If He thinks it's best to grow you up by taking that, as a loving Father wanting nothing more than for us to mature in this life, He'll take it right out of your hand. Why covet and clench your hand so tight, hold on to something? That's not an obstacle for God to take that from you. It just makes it harder on you if He chooses to take it. I thought that was sage advice. Hold the things of this world in an open palm. Enjoy them, love them, cherish them. Don't worship them. Don't covet them. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. One quick, nothing about this has been quick. That's okay. Marvin Vincent wrote a Word Studies in the New Testament, very, very famous book. I'm sure we have a copy in here. Word Studies, so you can go look up a Greek word, and Marvin Vincent will tell you the etymology of the word, what it used to be used for, etc. And this is what he says about faith. I thought this was good, so I gave it to you. Faith. Faith apprehends as a real fact, what is not revealed to the senses. What does science want? Science wants to be able to see things, to feel things, to experiment on things, to repeat things. Faith is not scientific. Faith apprehends as a real fact what is not revealed to the senses. Can't see it, can't smell it, can't touch it, can't hear it, can't taste it. And not only does faith apprehend as a real fact these things that aren't revealed to the senses, but it rests on that fact. It's convinced, convicted, settled, and anchored and immovable. If God says it, it's true. And nothing can change that. It rests on that fact. It acts upon, we're talking about faith. Faith rests upon the fact. It acts upon the fact and is upheld by it. Hold on tight. It's upheld by it in the face of all that seems to contradict it. Sarah. How could a 90-year-old woman have a child? It's impossible. But yet by the end, Sarah had faith, named her son Yitzhak, in the face of everything that seemed to contradict it, everything that the senses, the logic, the mind. Imagine Joshua crossing the Jordan River with an army of Israeli soldiers ready to fight. And God tells him, march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 days. And on the seventh day, march around it 7 times. And then everybody get your trumpets and blow. And all the people are going to scream out loud. And the walls of Jericho are going to fall down. And you're just going to walk across the walls and capture the city. What? I'm a military general. I fight. Not on that day. God fights. And so in the Bible, we seem to see things and hear things from God that may contradict what the world keeps pounding: gather, gather, mine, collect. He that dies with the most toys wins. God says just the opposite. If they come to get your stuff, Hebrews chapter 10, joyfully hand it over, knowing that in heaven what awaits you is far superior to whatever they just came and took from you. You're storing up treasures in heaven. But do you believe it? There's some really hard passages in the Bible, aren't there? Some really heavy lifting for people of a 6-pound brain. It's like, Lord, you gave us so much responsibility. And his response, I think, to that would be, yes, and I gave you a completed canon, the mind of my Son, Jesus Christ. I gave you a sample of his thinking so you'd know how to think. I gave you God the Holy Spirit to guide you through this life, to give you strength, encouragement. I know I've given you a hard task, but I wouldn't have given it to you if it wasn't possible. Faith. Faith. That's what faith is. So God is building Gideon's faith in Judges chapter 7. A man who lacks this confidence in the promise of God to do exactly what he says he'll do. Here we see Gideon's faith being built. So I told you that Yahweh is going to allow Gideon to overhear the enemy. Let's look at it, verse 9. Now the same night it came about that Yahweh said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands." So what has Yahweh revealed to Gideon? Again, the battle is over. It hasn't even started yet. But in God's mind, the battle is finished. I have given it. This is a past tense fact. I've already done it. I've already decided this is how this is going to play out. I've already given it over. But Gideon, do you believe me? Will you have trust enough to take your 300 men or not? Verse 10, God knows all things. The heart of man's laid bare before the Lord. He knows Gideon's still afraid. He knows Gideon needs more signs. He knows Gideon needs his faith built further before he'll lead his men into battle. Again, remember, 300 men against 135,000. You'd have to be crazy. Or have the God, creator God of the universe on your side. One or the other. If you're afraid to go down, so he's telling Gideon, go down to the camp. I have a message for you there. But in verse 10, he says, but if you are afraid, because I know you are, if you're afraid to go down, then go with Purah, your servant, down to the camp. So when God builds our faith, not only does he build our faith, but if we need something to come alongside us to help build our faith, maybe another person, what does God do? He provides the other person. It's all taken care of. Here's the other guy, Purah. I know you're afraid, Gideon. I know you need the strengthening of another man. I'll provide it. Here he is. It's a beautiful plan, this godly plan. And you'll hear what they say. So take Purah if you're afraid. If you're not afraid, go alone. But if you are afraid, and because you are, go with your friend. And you'll hear what they say. And afterward, your hands will be strengthened. So God knows that Gideon still yet doesn't have the strength, the faith, the courage, the trust in God to do what God tells him to do. But after I show you this, reveal to yourself who I am as God, certainly your hands will be strengthened that you may go down against the camp. So what does Gideon do showing his fear? He went down with Purah because he was afraid. He went with Purah, his servant, down to the outposts of the army that was in the camp. So he's on the outskirts of this massive 135,000 person camp. There's tents, there's camels. The Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts. They were everywhere. And their camels were there without number, as numerous as the sand of the seashore. Why did they need camels? I mean, this was an army. Why would they need camels? Remember what the Midianites did every year? Why are they in the land of Canaan? What are they there to get? Once a year, the Midianites came into the land of Canaan as numerous as locusts, this story says. And they would rape, if you will allow me that word, the land of Canaan. They would take its produce, they would take its olives, they would take its ox, its sheep, its goats. They would take everything from the land, take it back out across the Jordan River to Midian and to Amalek, and that's where they would use these things. They were stealing from Israel. They needed the camels as beasts of burden to carry all their loot out. That's why the camels. When Gideon came, now only God can do this. Just listen to the story. When Gideon came, behold, a man. Now this is a Gentile Midianite, an enemy. A man was relating a dream to his friend. So this man, on the very night that God told Gideon to go into the camp, God had this man dream a specific dream, and at the very moment in this 135,000 person camp with tents and camels everywhere, God sends Gideon to the very exact spot on the outskirts of the camp where he can overhear this one man in all of the valley who God has given a dream who's about to tell it to a friend. Who does these things? God does these things. And this is what the man said. This was his dream. He says, behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian. It's a servant's bread, a servant's loaf, barley bread. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian. Remember, they were on the mount, the Jews were, and he's seeing this little insignificant piece of bread fall down off the mountain into the camp of Midian. And it came to the tent and struck it so that it fell, and turned it upside down so that the tent lay flat. So this little insignificant piece of bread comes down into the Midianite camp and destroys this tent. Verse 14, his friend replied. So not only did God give one man a dream, but God also supplied the man who could interpret the dream. Reminds me of Joseph. It's just God. It's the way He does things. Talk about building a man's faith. Lord, how are you going to get me out of this? He said, I've got a million ways I could. But I'm going to choose one, and that way is going to blow your mind. It's going to knock your socks off at the abilities that I have to make the impossible simple. So here's the response from his friend. His friend said, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. So not only has God told Gideon this mouth to mouth, Gideon has heard the voice of God tell him this, but now to build Gideon's faith, God uses a Gentile Midianite, a member of the enemy army, to also say, God has given the Midianites into the hand of Gideon. He's building Gideon's faith. The lengths God will go to build our faith, you just can't stop Him. He's a loving God. When Gideon heard the account of his dream, verse 15, when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, how did he respond? Finally, Gideon, he bowed in worship. Finally, after the fleece, after the sign of the burn, remember the angel of the Lord with his staff touched the food and burnt it up off of the altar, off the table that it was on. After the sign of the wet fleece, and then the next night the dry fleece. God continues personally, very personally active in Gideon's life. God continues to build his faith. And here finally, by overhearing a Gentile enemy say, Gideon is coming and Gideon will win, finally Gideon says, okay, I'll worship. And he falls down on his knees to worship Yahweh. And you may be harsh to Gideon, but right now I'm giving Gideon everything. At least he got it. Some people never get it. Some people never fall to their knees in worship, but not Gideon. Gideon fell. Gideon fell down and he bowed low in worship of Yahweh. Trust complete now. Confidence was complete now. Gideon's ready to go. You think, how's God going to build my faith? I don't think He can do what I need Him to do. If you're sensitive to the movements of God and the Word of God, He'll build your faith, just like He built Gideon's. That's why the story's here. That's why He tells us these things, so you can expect it in your own life. He returned to the camp of Israel and he said, arise. Before it was God who said, arise. And now we have Gideon saying, I'm ready to lead. Everybody up. So he returned to the camp of Israel and he said, arise, for Yahweh, the God of Israel, Yahweh has given the camp of Midian into your hands. I'm just glad he finally believes it. I'll give him all. God knew what he was doing. God was patient with Gideon and building his faith. I just thank God that we have in the story Gideon finally believes God and he's ready to lead the 300 men into battle. So Gideon finally has faith in Yahweh that he needs to lead the army. He believes that Yahweh will do exactly what he said he will do. I will give Midian into your hands. And this Gideon, not the early Gideon, not from chapter 6 and not from the rest of chapter 7, this Gideon of chapter 15 who says, arise, let's go. This Gideon is the one from Hebrews 11 that we read about that had the faith to conquer nations. But look how much it took. Look how much work God had to do. Look at the time God presented Gideon with to build his faith little by little over the days and the week or so that happened in the last 2 chapters. God has built up Gideon's faith now so that Gideon will act. We'll pick up here next time. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you.